Chris Level not only covers Texas Tech, a part of the Texas Tech broadcast, with us now on 365 Sports, Chris in Lubbock. And Chris, it's interesting that we planned to have you on today, and then all of a sudden this story came out with Don Williams, the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, and what Kirby Hocutt is saying, what Campbell is saying, what Del Conte is saying. Was this a deal?
Yeah, well, and I've talked to Cody this morning, Cody Campbell, who is, he's a board of regent and obviously big-time donor up here and everything like that. I think he was directly involved with a lot of those talks. But I think it was actually about a year ago at this time that they had kind of a lot of the intermediaries from Texas Tech, including the president and AD, and then donors and regents and people like that. They were meeting with Governor Abbott, and they were frustrated. And they were like, we were blindsided and everything. And so, like, what are you going to do to make it right? And I think this is something that everybody walked away from feeling like fairly amendable. I have no way of knowing if the Texas folks were in on the deal, but Governor Abbott certainly was and was a part of it. And so there's a lot of politics at play here. And I think even leveraging votes and, just trying to like say, hey, man, West Texas and the oil and gas industry and all that's out of here, we can sway this thing, but you need to take care of us here. But, it sounds like that maybe some crawfishing going on. I don't really ultimately know. We won't ultimately know until Texas is not a member of this league. But I mean, at the Houston game, it's funny that Texas Tech is playing Houston this weekend because at the Houston game in Houston last year, Kirby Hocutt kind of made that public. He told everybody publicly, all the donors that were there to speaking engagements the night before the game, hey, this is what's going to happen, folks. So don't fret, or it's not all bad news and all these things. We're still going to get to play these guys, and they're going to have to come to Lubbock and all that stuff. But now here we are a year later, and I don't know.
Do you feel? I mean, like they lost A&M as a rival. Tech did. They're losing Texas as a rival. Is this maybe kind of a grab for them to make sure that they don't lose everything that the older fans grew up with?
Yeah, I think it's just it's like everybody else. You're trying to make your home schedule something that people are interested in and want to buy season tickets to. And we could say whatever we want to about Texas, but there's nobody more fun to beat than those guys, and it's hard to do it. Right? It's been hard for Texas Tech especially to do it in the last decade, but there's nobody, and obviously now with everything that basketball has going on with Texas Tech and Texas, I mean, those games were some of the most energetic sporting events I've ever been a part of in any level last year, including the Final Four. And so I think that there's, again, there's some passion there. And I think, and again, I get it. If Texas wouldn't want to do that, they've got bigger fish to fry. But I think that it's trying to hold on to something, that entices people to buy tickets and do these things. And it's a spicy rivalry up here. It may not be down there, but, and I think as Kirby has pointed out, look, our fans show up in Austin no matter whatever the sport is. So we help them sell tickets too.
Chris, in terms of sticking with rivalry talk here, I mean, Houston obviously this weekend coming to Lubbock, a fascinating game, looking at both sides of it. It's a lot of questions to be answered, and it seems like a very even contest. I'm sure you've heard the talk about, future rivalries in the Big 12 and what could blossom, Baylor, BYU, and the timing of Houston and Texas Tech this weekend. I know Baylor folks certainly feel, and BYU folks feel like, this is kind of a sign of things to come. Do you feel that way with Houston and Texas Tech? Does this kind of stick out as a potential strong rivalry moving forward?
Absolutely. There's a ton of Tech alumni in the city of Houston, and you've been fortunate enough to win 9 of your last 10 against them, and I think 4 in a row against the Cougars. But this has always been a swing game for Texas Tech, just because, if you get it in the non-conference and you get the win, you really set yourself up to have a good year. If you don't get it, however, you're kind of behind the 8 ball and trying to get bowl eligible, as you've kind of struggled in the last decade or so. You beat them in 17, 18, and then again last year. And those wins all were huge, just trying to have a successful season. Because, let's just talk about it this year. You don't get it done on Saturday if you're a Red Raider. You're 1-1, and you're going to play at a top 25 NC State team at their place at nighttime on a Saturday night, and that's going to be tough to get done. So you run the risk of dropping to 1-2 if you don't get it done. But it's a very even game. There's a lot of history here. Dana's been on this sideline, was for 8 years, and obviously he's coached the offense at Oklahoma State in this stadium, and he's obviously been on the sideline as the head coach for West Virginia now Houston. So he's very familiar with Lubbock and the tortillas and all that stuff.
Chris Level with us, Texas Tech Radio on Sikkim 365 Radio, 365 Sports. So we knew the quarterback room was deep. We had Joey on Big 12 Media Days. They're in great shape there. And then, of course, Shuck goes down, and Donovan Smith, who's very talented and a really good player, steps in. Was that seamless the way that just he's in, everything's fine?
Yeah, and I mean, the first thing is you just hate seeing that for a kid that, he'd worked his tail off since the day that he got hurt last year, and the injury looked all too familiar, just getting driven into the ground. But they have, it's not been lip service. They let the quarterback competition go for a long ways up here, and I think it's a credit to Tyler that he won it, and he did win it for a reason. I mean, make no mistake. I mean, he won that competition for a reason, because Donovan and Barron, they tried. They just weren't as good as he was. But Donovan has got experience. He was a Liberty Bowl MVP. He was voted team captain. I don't really know if I can remember a team that had two team captains, both were quarterbacks. That just kind of tells you who Donovan is and what his teammates think of him. But no, he'll be just fine. I just think there's some things that he doesn't do as well as Tyler potentially had done in the off season, but there's probably things that he can do that Tyler or Barron can't do either, running and all those kinds of things. But I'm kind of curious to see what he does with it, but competition is about to get a lot tougher.
What do you think the biggest matchup problem that Tech will have with Houston is?
I think what ultimately decides the game, or if Tech can play this matchup straight up or even win it, I think they'll be fine. If they can't, it's going to be problems, and that's their O-line versus Houston's defensive line. That was the big question mark for the Red Raiders coming into the season. They added 5 transfers there. They knew they needed help and experience and just trying to get those guys to mesh and gel and all those things. And if they can protect Donovan and not give up some sacks and keep Donovan fairly clean, I think they'll be okay. But if Houston's defensive line did a pretty good job against UTSA last week, and that's really the one matchup I look at right there to say ultimately that could decide the game.
Chris, how did it just feel to see the McGuire era start off? There's so much lead in, with his hire and then the recruiting craziness and staff hires and just all the changes and fun that come with like this changeover, right? And then to finally, be at the Jones and to have that crowd going crazy. What was that like?
Yeah, I keep waiting for somebody to pull the rug out on old Joey, man, because he's been as energetic and nice and transparent from the day that I've met him. We talk often. I'm hosting this coach's show tonight. He's just been awesome. And it was really fun for me to sit here and watch him just kind of live his dream, if you will, because I think he's always wanted to be a D1 head coach. This is kind of his trajectory with his career, and the fans have just eaten it up and love him, and he's loved them back, and it's been a lot of fun. And he never wavers. People are like, see that way every day? I'm like, every day that I've been around him, he is. And that's just who he is. And he's just such a nice guy, and it's kind of a breath of fresh air, because there's some folks in this sport, we probably can name off some, that aren't very nice behind the scenes, and he's just been great to deal with.
Chris, I looked at the schedule of Texas Tech. Houston this week, and they just had Murray State. They have Texas at home, they have Baylor at home, and they have Oklahoma at home. Last year, Baylor had a lot of those games at home as well. Tech has it this year. Which of those games will be the most explosive in your opinion?
Well, the Texas one is going to be a little more spicy for the reasons that we talked about when we first got on the show. Because, I mean, let's be honest, is this the last time they're in Lubbock, Texas? Mm-hmm. It's possible. I mean, and I think that the Red Raider fans are certainly, and 2 years ago, you had them dead to rights. You had them beat. You couldn't close it out and finish it. It was just that was one of the reasons why that ultimately there was a coaching change in just games like that. But the Oklahoma game is on Thanksgiving weekend. That's at the very end. I'd love to know what that means, and I hate it that it got buried on that weekend. The Baylor one will be a lot of fun just because of Joey's ties to the folks at Baylor. He says nothing but great things about Matt Rule and Dave Aranda and his time there, and that's he's got a healthy respect for the folks there. But I think that Texas game, for all the reasons that, and even if the story hadn't have popped up, there's just the folks up here just don't like, and a lot of it has to do with Chris Beard and just that color and everything that Texas is, right? I mean, that's what makes sports fun, and college sports specifically.
I think you said it best earlier, and it summed up how I've always kind of felt. It's just fun to beat Texas, right? It's just like everybody has.
And everybody does. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are in the league. And it's like if you're Baylor and you're watching Texas play somebody, Kansas State or West Virginia, you're almost always rooting for the other team to beat them. I mean, it's just that's just how it goes. But I'm sure Texas loves that too.
I've watched more Kansas football as a result of Texas than I ever would have otherwise.
Wow.
Well said. Well, it's off the top rope right there. That's
well, and a lot of reasons is because Texas owns a huge advantage against everybody in the series that they've played along the years as well. And then there's also the thought about the entitlement and a little bit of the arrogance and all that as well. And now, of course, the spice of when they will leave. And people have been able to get their shots at them the last decade. We'll see if that continues this year or not. Texas Tech, of course, the last couple of times has been beaten up pretty good. As far as the game with Houston, you mentioned NC State next week. There's no way that they're looking past this game. What will be the difference in your opinion? Will this be a shootout game or maybe not?
I bet it's similar to last year. I bet this is a game played in the 20s or low 30s. I don't necessarily think shootout per se. I think the defenses are both pretty good. And, Tech's defense, obviously, and rightfully so, it's much maligned. It's been talked about. But they have turned the corner. They're not where they ultimately want to be. But they play pretty good defense up here. Keith Patterson deserves a lot of credit. He's now the head coach at Abilene Christian. And they're really old, especially on the back end. And I think that I would expect a 28-24, 21-17, maybe 31-28 type of game. But because Dana's really evolved as an offensive coach. This is much more like what West Virginia was doing. I mean, he uses a lot of tight ends and two backs, and they don't run a lot of tempo per se. They'll huddle a little bit. I mean, so this isn't the old air raid kind of Dana that when he was doing this 8 years ago under Mike and when Sonny Dykes was here too. I mean, he's kind of evolved as an offensive coach and kind of adapted with the times like everybody else has.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate your time. The season is here. It's about games right now. There's still the college football expansion, the playoff, and also still realignment stuff in the air. But isn't it great to just discuss games?
Yeah, man. I love this time of year, man. I mean, football on TV is just good for the soul, man. That's just all there is to it.
Thank you,
all there is to it.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. Chris Level, again, RedRaidersports.com, part of the Texas Tech broadcast as well, Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports.